Welcome to Ron Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It's a delight to be here tonight. I can't imagine people staying up this late to listen to politicians, believe me. But it's great to be here, and it's a great theme tonight, talking about freedom and faith. I cannot imagine any two more important issues of that, because I frequently will say throughout my campaigning and rallies that we've had that the goal of all political activity is liberty. And what is the purpose of having this liberty? Well, the purpose of liberty, as far as I'm concerned, is to allow creative energy to be released for us to then seek virtue and excellence, because governments can't provide virtue and excellence. You have to have a free society so we as individuals can assume that responsibility. You know, life is precious. I'm an OB doctor. I've delivered over 4,000 babies. And there are some of my friends who take a different position on the life issue. And they claim that the mother, you've heard all the arguments, the mother's life is precious. You can't interfere with her and her body. But as an OB doctor, let me tell you, life does begin at conception. And also, it's very legal. If I, as a physician, do something wrong and injure the fetus, I can rightfully be sued because of the rights of the fetus. If the fetus is injured in an accident or a homicide, there is a homicide because of the fetus being killed. So there is no doubt in my mind about the respect that we should have for life. Why is this so important? Well, for most of us, we respect liberty and freedom. That's what we're engaged in, is protecting freedom. So if we do not have high respect for life, how can we be dealing with our personal freedom, our personal privacy, our rights to homeschool our kids, and the right to pick our religion and make personal choices on what we do? It would be impossible if you don't have high regards and respect for life, and then respect for liberty, because without liberty, we do not have what has made this country so great. We live in difficult times today because I think there's been a total rejection of some of these basic principles that have made America great. I was in the military during the 1960s. I was in the Air Force for 5 years. But the 60s were rough times. We were engaged in, unfortunately, an undeclared war, and it was tragic in the sense of life lost. But cultural changes were occurring, and that is when abortion, became, commonplace. So the people changed before the laws changed. So morality has a lot to do with legislation. We don't have abortions today because the law permits it. That's made it worse. But the law accommodated the social changes that occurred. It was the breakdown of our social system at that time. The war had something to do with it. The drug culture had something to do with it. And, of course, this move toward making life so careless and accepting the notion of abortion. But during this period of time, there was a rejection of the family as well. It started off, then the statistics came out, and they started to show that minorities were having more babies out of wedlock. But now it's cultural. I mean, it is getting to be epidemic that the family values and the families have broken down, and this is where our real problems come from. We would like to think all we have to do is elect the right politicians and everything is going to be okay. But believe me, the government is a reflection of the people. That's why the burden is on people like you to make sure that we have those But the family is something that's very important. It's ingrained in our Christian heritage. There's, in the Constitution, one of the provisions that I cite the most frequently is Article 1, Section 8, because that tells you everything we're allowed to do. The rest of the things we're not allowed to do, and the 9th and 10th Amendment, of course, confirms that belief. But there's a biblical passage in the Old Testament. It's 1 Samuel chapter 8. So I remember that, the first chapter of Samuel, 1 Samuel in chapter 8. Now that is the provision. I'm sure that you have heard of it before, because this is when, after the Israelites came out of Egypt, they had accepted God as their king. And that's what they lived by. They did not have a king. What they had were judges. It was a patriarchal society. It was a family-driven society. But there were always going to be arguments and conflicts. So these conflicts were taken not to the government, but to somebody that was chosen to be a judge and a respected person that respected the law and respected their traditions. But a time came, there was always temptation, even as the Israelites were leaving Egypt, that there was the temptation to drift away from the belief in God. But there was this effort made under Samuel. The people came and said, we want somebody to take care of us. We want a king. And Samuel strongly objected to it. He explained to him, you do not want a king. That will substitute for God. And he said, and he predicts in this, you need to read that chapter because he predicts what happens if you have a king. He said, the king will take your young people, your young men to fight war, the young women to be used in the government. They're going to tax you and they're going to overburden you, and you will have to work so much time, like 25, 35, 45% of the time for the king. And I got to thinking, it was astute wisdom and astute advice, but isn't that essentially what we have done today? I don't think we need a king, and we don't need Washington to act as if they're the king in this country. But today there is so much dependency on the government, and it's cradle to grave, and we have so little confidence in ourselves. We believe that if we don't have the safety net and we don't have the government there, if we don't have medical care taken care of, if we don't have the government schools, everything would fall apart. We have, as a people, lost our confidence and understanding of what true liberty is all about and where it comes from. And it doesn't come from our king. It doesn't come from our government. Our liberties come from our Creator. That's where our life and liberty comes from. But it was advised by the founders at the time that the Constitution would not work if we did not remain a moral society. And we're at the crossroads right now because we have lived beyond our means. We have become totally dependent. We do all the things that we shouldn't do and don't do the things we should do. What are we doing? You just take, for instance, our foreign policy. When's the last time we declared war? When's the last time we won a war outright? It's been a long time ago. We do need, in the Constitution, a strong national defense. We should have a strong national defense, and we're allowed to defend ourselves. But the obligation is to be the Congress through the people. When we have an enemy that we have to go after, we should declare the war and win the war and not have these perpetual wars and allowing our president to go into places like Libya without even telling us about it. But faith and freedom is a crucial item. We must have the faith that generates an understanding of what true liberty is about. But we also have to have confidence and an understanding about the proper foreign policy, a constitutional foreign policy, but an understanding of free market economics. What about a biblical understanding about what honest money is about? What about honest weights and measures and no paper currency and no Federal Reserve that destroys our currency? There's nothing moral about our financial system and our monetary system. And this recent breakdown of our system is proof positive of it. because it was predictable that there was a bubble out there. Many predicted it, that it would come and it would burst, and it did. But guess what? Washington panicked, and they said, you know, the end of the world is coming, so what we must do is we must tax the people and spend more money and borrow more money and print more money, and that's going to get us out of trouble. But they didn't ask, how did we get into this trouble? Well, we spent too much, we borrowed too much, we regulated too much, and we printed too much, and they thought that was going to help. But it doesn't work that way. Honest money means that you can't counterfeit money. There's a good little booklet called The Law by Bastiat, and he teaches a principle that you as an individual, or the government can't do anything that you as an individual can't do. But you're not allowed to counterfeit. Why do we allow the government to counterfeit? That's why government is so big. They don't have to be responsible. And we don't need to raise the national debt so that they're just encouraged to spend more money. But they should not be allowed to just print the money, because it is immoral, and it is the encouragement for big government. There hasn't been a war fought in the many, many centuries without debasing the currency. Since the crash of 2008, our dollar actually has been devalued 50% against gold. So therefore, look out for trouble. And the odds of us cutting back over in the hill and live sensibly aren't very good. So we are going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged because we will not be able to depend on our king. The king's time has run out, and guess who you're going to have to depend on? You're going to have to depend on yourself, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your church to be prepared. It will be challenging. There is no doubt about it. But the reason why we should be optimistic about this is we have great traditions. We know something about sound money, private property, contract rights, and it's not quite like the kind of problems that the Soviet system met. But we will. We're overextended internationally. We cannot be the peacemaker of the world. We cannot be nation building because we don't have the money. At times when I think about what we need to do, everybody that wants to tell you what to do, you'll have to sacrifice. Well, you know what? I don't tell the people I talk to that it's up to you you have to sacrifice. You might have to go to work and take care of yourself, but what would it be like if you had less regulation, no income tax, and sound money? That's not a sacrifice. That means you could take care of yourself a lot easier. The people that ought to be sacrificing are the people who ripped us off in the building up of the bubble, and then we went and bailed them out, and they're making big bucks again, and we don't. And the people who are suffering as the middle class, they lost their jobs, they lost their mortgages, lost their houses. A moral society would not let that happen. We need to believe once again in the principles of liberty. We need to understand why the family is the bedrock. The educational system should be through the family and the church. We should be promoting homeschooling and private schooling and not depending on our public school system. But the good news is I have been speaking out a lot in the last couple of years, especially around the country, and with a lot of young people, and I spot a lot of young people here. The burden is falling on the young people, but it's not the next generation. It's this generation. It's right here today, so we have to deal with our problems. But there's a lot of enthusiasm for the renewal of the concept of personal liberty and the concept of our Constitution and those things that have made America great. And I thank you very much.